Thanks for the recording. You can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Thank you. I hope to do this brief. We are all here to talk today about the new call for applications for joining the cohort of 2025 of the Rainforest Investigations Network. So the Rainforest Investigations Network exists since 2021. We designed the program at the end of 2020, a lot inspired by the work that was done by the Rainforest Journalism Fund, which was a previous project of the Pulitzer Center distributing grants for journalists working in the Amazon, Congo Basin, and Southeast Asia. But during the pandemic, there was this perception that it would be very, very important to provide fellowships as well, and allow people to do more in-depth investigation type of work. So the focus of this program is really providing the opportunity for journalists who are doing really in-depth investigative data work, looking at supply chains, looking at systemic issues, and I'll talk more about this. But just to give you an overview of everything that we have done over these 4 years with RIN, so we provided 56 year-long fellowships in these 4 years. Some very few fellows renew their fellowships, but most of the years we choose an entire new cohort. And through these years, roughly, there's more stories that were recently published, but we account by the end of the 4th year on the program, almost 200 original investigations that were published in several languages, like in several countries, and also not only in the Amazon, the Congo Basin, and Southeast Asia, but global outlets as well have published some of these stories. What we call it here, pieces of coverage, is that how much of these stories were published or repercussions, like follow-ups that were done. That's something that we track as well, what the original stories, the original investigation has created in terms of other pieces of coverage. So this is an indicator for us. And we use a tool. I know some of you might know that some of this online tools to measure audience is not always very accurate, but we have an estimate that at least 16 million page views were generated with all these stories. So the impact is big. We have worked with several kinds of outlets. We've worked from very small outlets, and like in Cameroon or the DRC, but also worked with major outlets like NBC that Andrew Lehren is representing here, the New York Times. So it's this mix that we believe makes the power of this network. Let me pass to the next one. So this is how we look like on daily basis. We do a lot of online events. This is a picture of the former cohort at 2023. But as I told you, like we look at projects that are aiming at covering issues in the Amazon, Congo Basin, and Southeast Asia. This is a limitation that was created during the design of the project. Sometimes we get questions of why not working with rainforests that exist or like subtropical forests that exist in parts of South America or Asia. It's really an issue of focus on tropical rainforests. So the Amazon, Congo Basin, and the forests of Southeast Asia are really our focus. We do meetings. Sometimes we have the opportunity to do like gatherings in person, but we tend to do like regional gatherings. We have very few opportunities to be all the cohort at once in one place, but still we have a lot of activities online, and we tend to do the regional meetings. Just recently, some of our fellows were attending the African Investigative Journalists Conference. We attend, like the Latin American Investigative Journalists Conference. We try to promote the projects of the fellows in these conferences and also create opportunities for meeting. But just to give you a taste on how we work. So what is included in this fellowship? It's really like a 1-year support of financial support for you. Like we pay for your salary. Once you became a fellow, you receive a salary that is financial support, but also you receive the support for doing for your reporting expenses. question that I'm pretty sure will emerge: how much is the fellowship? So it varies according to the region and according to your experience. The way we do is like once the fellow is selected, we follow up with your editor or with you and ask what's your salary, and we see if we can cover that. Sometimes we go even beyond, depending on the region, for not creating so much inequalities in the region. So it happened in a few cases that we were able to increase the salary of someone just to having this equity, regional equity. But sometimes there are issues with global outlets that have very high salaries, and we tend to negotiate a midterm or something part of the salary because we have a limited budget per year. But most of the cases we were able to either cover the entire salary or going a little bit beyond. So the negotiations are individual. Keep in mind that we take into account this regional factor, and we really try to be like fair among the fellows, not creating big disparities. So there's this fellowship, and again, there's like the reporting expenses support that pays for your trip, that pays for your consultant on data. You might want to hire someone for doing some data visualization and maps for you. That's something that we would cover. We would cover up to $10,000 in this entire year for your reporting expenses. What we don't cover is any admin costs of the outlet that is supporting you, or like staff that is editing. We expect the outlet to give you this editorial support. Although, as you can see in the list of what is included, we do editorial mentoring. I carry this title of being the environmental investigations editor. My role is really try to understand the projects and your stories and help you to get the best angles. So that's the mentoring. We have the data and research team that helps a lot on, like what's the best ways of tackle the materials, the documents. That's part of the editorial mentoring. And we have the entire team of the Pulitzer Center, which is great. Our executive editor, Marina Walker, is very involved with the project, and she might, be a great advisor in some issues. We try to find other editors have expertise in some regions as well to help. So we're there for you to help you. And there's a lot of capacity building as well. As I mentioned, we have a data and research team that does a syllabus, a program of training over the year, and we'll see more about this training. I'll have a slide that I'll tell you more about this training. We also help a lot of you doing some collaboration. Another question that I'm pretty sure some of you might have is, I'm obliged to present a project that includes a collaboration, a cross-border collaboration. You are not obliged to, but we would like to see collaboration going on. The collaboration is pretty real from day one. As we sit on that online meeting, we exchange ideas, we exchange resources, we exchange tools and skills. That's collaboration for us as well. This is really a network. It's not that you're gonna get the fellowship and just say like, well, now I'm a fellow, I'll see you 1 year from now. We really would like to be close to you, and makes this network a very like a very relevant experience for all of you. So that is the collaboration in real terms. But if you have ideas for collaborating with journalists in other countries, maybe we'll find another fellow that can collaborate in your project. That's the holy grail for us. That's what we want to see in terms of collaboration. And finally, there's an aspect that's very interesting to the Pulitzer Center, that everything that we do, we try in terms of investigation and stories, tends to be transformed in products or activities of education and outreach. We have a team that is called the engagement team that transforms stories, transforms in a very responsible way into lessons for schools in the US and beyond. In Brazil, we have lessons. We have done lessons in the Philippines and the Congo as well. Visits to universities and schools, also in the US and other countries, and a lot of work on the outreach, like social media, and can be other things like film festivals, photo exhibitions, art exhibitions. We have done so much in the past 2 years in terms of being creative, in terms of reaching diverse audiences, because as you probably know at this time, being a journalist, that it's not enough just to publish a story. That's the start of the process. Then you have to do more to reach to a diverse audience, strategic audiences for that specific issue. So that's really what is included in this program. One question that I'm also envisioning is like, can I apply as a freelance without a support of an outlet? The answer is no. We need an outlet to commit to work with you in this project for a year. Even if the letter says like, okay, we'll wait for the approval to, like to hire this person. We don't need you to be hired. What we need is a letter of interest and commitment of publishing if the project is approved. Of course, there's always editorial independence. It's not that we will force any outlet to publish a story if the story is not good. In the end, it's the editor who will decide when and how the story is going to be published. We are here to support, but we need this commitment. No application will be reviewed or accepted without a letter of an outlet supporting your project. That's a very important point. Let me give you an example of a great collaboration that explains a lot of this model that we've been pursuing with RIN. I'll be brief on the example because we have Andy here, but we have done a big collaboration among journalists at RIN that end up publishing with the New York Times. I don't know if you saw this story about the airstrips. It was published 2 years ago with the New York Times, showing how illegal airstrips in the Brazilian Amazon was fueling the invasion of indigenous land and illegal gold mining. So this was a collaboration between a fellow called Manuela Andreoni, who's now working with the New York Times, and another one working for the Intercept Brazil. So each one of them were doing stories in different regions, but looking at the same issues. They didn't publish the same story. There were two different stories. One is looking at one part of Brazil. Another one is looking at the northern part, border with Venezuela, but they're both using the same database of illegal airstrips and satellite imagery of this illegal airstrips. So the story was very successful, as you can see, it made the first page of the New York Times. But the interesting thing is that the method of finding these airstrips that was supported by us, like funded by us, ended up being used by another journalist in Venezuela. So they didn't collaborate directly, but the method and the technique of using satellite data for finding the illegal mines and the airstrips created another project in Venezuela. So that is a great example for us because it shows the potential of, like this mentoring and having the support of the data team and the use of some technology and tools, generating projects in different regions, but with the kind of the same purpose and same angle. And the other part is that for us, that allowed to launch a tool in itself. So we launched together with this project, this tool that's called Amazon Mining Watch, which is a monitor of illegal mining using machine learning in the Amazon. So that's kind of things that we're trying to do for being really ambitious, finding projects that also can be extrapolated in a way, can become a tool that will help other journalists, can enable collaboration. Again, you are not obliged to collaborate. You're not supposed to apply with a collaboration ready-made or already planned. You can suggest what would be the avenues to make your project, like bigger than it's on just one story. That's one way of putting. So what kind of data you will be working with that can be useful for other journalists? What kind of methodologies you have in mind that gives a new angle to an issue like gold mining or illegal logging or supply chain? Our focus is really trying to be systemic, because that's what makes a story about rainforests important. As you know, rainforests are connecting several countries globally, like the big supply chains connects the Amazon with China, or like the soybeans that comes from also the Amazon connects with Europe, or the palm oil that comes from Southeast Asia connects the entire globe with the supply chains. So finding these systemic views of these issues is really what we are looking for. Let me tell you about a bit of the impact, the kind of things that you can have with RIN. So we've been seeing over these years that being part of RIN has changed careers, so we have an individual impact, also has helped to change some outlets that started to covering much more some of the systemic issues, or not only in deforestation, but like supply chains and issues of illegality in the rainforest, and how this connects with some of global trends or climate change. So we're seeing outlets being changed by participating in RIN. And we're seeing, as I was telling before, major changes also in the society. Like we had stories like that one on Gonna Go, the one in the Intercept in the New York Times, that helped like the police to stop the operations of those companies. That's one very direct example. But we had stories that were quoted on audiences in different congresses. A lot about impact, I'm pretty sure, being the journalist you are. But that's what we're looking at, these three levels of impact. And I'm telling you also to inspire you to apply and thinking about how to present this proposal, how important it's going to be to your career or to your outlet, or what kind of impact you also envision in your country, in your region. We have a great example in this guy here, Yahoo Law, a Malaysian journalist who worked for a very small outlet, but he was twice a fellow with us because he had such a great view, like on how to do investigations about deforestation in Malaysia. And he achieved the impact on these three levels in our view, because his career has changed. He became a very prominent journalist in Malaysia. His outlet, Makaranga, has become much more well-funded and dedicated to the issues that he did while in RIN, and also got a lot of responses from the Ministry of Environment, has shown a lot of problems in forest management in Malaysia. So he did this with wonderful visualizations, really rigorous field work as well. And he ended up winning like the award of Journalist of the Year, the Data Journalist of the Year, I think 2 years ago during the Sigma Award. Just one example of what is RIN at this point when we get to do very good stories. This is one part that interests a lot of you. I think it's one of the great things that we do with RIN. We do a lot of training. So also it's important to you to know that we expect you guys to be really engaged while doing this fellowship, to the point that we have 30 hours of training. So for the first 6 months, it's almost every 2 weeks, if not every week, depending on the demand, that we have trainings on data visualization, how to use satellite imagery, how to do geospatial analysis, how to work with, like scraping data, mental health. We are doing trainings more on safety, are expected to happen this next year, how to do like risk assessments. There's some more. Some of them are like 2 sessions, but they're great. We bring external consultants. Part of this training is also done by data and research team. So the way it works, the support of data research team is that depending on the outlet, depending on the capacity of one outlet, we tend to advise and do some of the data visualization, but that's exception, because we hope that the outlets that we work with will be able to provide this expertise. But what we do is like really thorough support. There is like a data hour that you can schedule with either Fernanda or Kang or Yelter or Federico. We have 5 people now working at this data and research team, and they're there for listening your demands and try to figure out how to extract data from the documents, or like how to create a Python script for getting to extract information from some databases. There are so many, how to find a high resolution satellite imagery, how to do a geospatial analysis comparing deforestation and protected areas. There are so many good examples. There's also like this kind of a one-on-one tutorials and training. We record videos of some of these tutorials to be shared with you. And as I said, like in some cases, we end up doing the data visualization for the story. It's not common, but it can happen. We also have very good partnerships and access to tools. One of the key partnerships that we have is this NGO in the US called the Earth Genome. They're the ones who developed that machine learned model for identifying mines. We're working with them to grow into other areas. What they do is a lot of AI applied to satellite imagery, and we see a great potential for that. We have access to high resolution satellite imagery through a partnership with this Norwegian company called KSAT. And we have done recent programs together with the universities also as a way of, like participating in courses while doing the investigations, sharing it with students or getting the support of students to investigate. So we did one big project with Berkeley, the investigative reporting project of the UC Berkeley. And most recently, we were working with the Center for Digital Humanities of Cambridge, doing part of their data school and getting support of them for some of the investigations of RIN fellows. We have a instance of Aleph, that big database of OCCRP that we call RIN data, where you can find the data that other fellows have used in the past. So, and store your data as well to help future fellows. So that allows you, like to look at the, just seeing like China global investments or the Brazilian environmental fines. You find like very comprehensive databases that were already used by former fellows. You can find on this repository. We have access to SciAri, sorry, a very powerful tool for corporate research and also for trade data with Import Genius. We try to get more and more tools depending on the demand of what you need. So you will get this while participating in the program. And finally, what I mentioned to you, there's very thorough work from our engagement team. We have a communications team, an education team, and an outreach team that works on different formats for social media, doing webinars and events to present your proposal, and much beyond, like we had examples of stories that became comics for schools in DRC. We have films like short documentaries that became part of film festivals. We have photo exhibitions. We have in Bangkok a group of artists that look at stories in Southeast Asia and transform that into art exhibitions inspired by the investigation. So this is a big part of what we believe is important to speaking out of the bubble, like reaching other kind of audiences. So this is part of the program as well. All right, just to finish, I'll leave you with that. The key dates that you should not forget. The main one, application deadline is by the end of the year. Up to that point, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll try to respond. You have that on the page of applications. I'll share the link if Fernanda haven't yet. But you can send an email. Maybe you can participate or watch videos of other webinars to see if any questions emerge from other candidates. But we have almost 2 months ahead to finish the process. And then we'll do like selection and interviews in the first 2 months of the year. And the fellowship starts in the mid-March and lasts for a year. A final thing, just to mention that, because it was an important thing that happened this year, more and more we are pushing the fellows to complete their investigative phase, like the data and the trips and everything in the first 10 months of the fellowship, and leaving the last 2 months to work on distribution and outreach. And the reason was we have several years where we would say like, okay, you just work until the end of the fellowship and we'll see when you publish. And then the stories started to drag in too much and even making some problems with the funders for us. But then we're asking people to start publishing. If you get the fellowship and starts in March, plan to have a project that is possible to be done in 10 months. It is a good thing that you publish, and 10 months seems to be a fair amount of time for doing a good story, because then you get extra 2 months to promote your story, to work with our communication team. If you publish by December, let's say, or even before, you have more time to enjoy, the glory of being a fellow and publishing a great investigation. All right, I'll leave it here. I'll invite Andy to share more of his work and his impressions of being a fellow. And then we come back for questions. And I'll take a look on chat now. Andy, are you there?
I am. And I
Good to see
hope
you.
you don't mind if I also share a presentation for a little bit. Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Great. Oh, I just need to have screen sharing. Here we go. Brilliant. One moment to make sure I pick the right one. There we go. Okay. First off, it's great to see everybody. And if anybody wants, I can share this slideshow uh, with Gustavo. My name's Andy Lehren. I used to be a longtime investigative reporter at the New York Times. I worked on things like the Snowden files and the WikiLeaks trove of diplomatic cables. I worked on a Pulitzer-winning series about how tainted chemicals from China flow into the world's pharmaceutical supply chain and have ended up killing and injuring people. I've worked on big collaborations like this one on medical devices and this one on money laundering through US banks. But obviously we're here to talk about the Pulitzer Center and the work that I've done with it. And first off, it's just amazing. I just really encourage everyone to apply. But one of the reasons I showed you some of my work is that if you're familiar with some of these projects, you may know that they involve doing collaborations, particularly international collaborations. So even though I've done my own work and it's been a pleasure to do my own projects, there is something about doing collaborations, and I think that's one of the benefits you get if you really want to take advantage of everything the Pulitzer Center has to offer is working on collaborations. All of us in different parts of the world working together can do stories that no one of us could do just by ourselves. The stories that I've gotten to do through the Pulitzer Center include examining a beautiful island in the Philippines that was all set to be have its rainforest essentially destroyed for a nickel mine so that the nickel could go into Teslas and Toyota automobiles. That was one of the first collaborations that I worked on. I also worked on a collaboration that examined how deforestation in Indonesia that was against all kinds of policies was designed to help fuel the fast fashion industry. Another collaboration was looking at monkeys in Cambodia and how they're being poached to the point of becoming endangered just so they can be used in medical testing for vaccines and drugs. And then an offshoot from being in the Pulitzer Center collaboration, like Gustavo was saying, you meet people, you exchange ideas. I was at a Pulitzer Center gathering, and the next thing I knew, I was also working on an investigation into the global sand industry. I also worked on gold being mined illegally in the Amazon and coming into the United States. And so one of the things that we were doing at this point, I was working at NBC News. One of the things we were doing was trying to find stories that we all know that there are stories out there about rainforest destruction, and we were trying to set the bar pretty high for ourselves because there are so many stories, unfortunately, to choose from. And one of the things we wanted to do was examine issues where the rainforests have not yet been destroyed or gutted. And can we do stories that get ahead of the curve? So we pushed ourselves to find stories like that. We also wanted to find stories where there were promises of protections, either by companies or governments. And we also really wanted to show how economic forces, especially those by American and Western consumers, are factors driving deforestation in our rainforests. So we worked on collaborations. I could tell you a little bit about how we teamed up with people, but we also worked very hard on storytelling because we also would tell these stories for television. We would tell them in a digital format that was very friendly for phones, as well as traditional written versions. Our story about nickel mining in the Philippines actually started with a terrific reporter named Carol Ilagan, and she's just amazing to work with. I met her through the Pulitzer Center Rainforest Investigation Network. Carolyn and I were chatting, just talking, and she said, listen, there's this rainforest set to be destroyed. It's in a protected area on a mountain. It's a beautiful part of the Philippines. We can't believe it's going to be destroyed, but we can't quite figure out where the nickel is going. And so one of the great things about collaborations is you work together to sort things out. Carol can do things in the Philippines that I cannot, and I try to lend a hand really examining how things flow around the world, commodities flow around the world. And we didn't quite know where things would end up when we started the story, but with a lot of digging, we could figure it out. But also to underscore something Gustavo was saying to you earlier, one of the great things about the Pulitzer Center are the resources. So we could do a lot on our own in our big American newsroom, but there were things that the Pulitzer Center has that are just amazing and sometimes too expensive for newsrooms. Sayari is definitely one of them. That's been helpful. It's a tool that lets you examine corporations around the world and corporate trading. To help familiarize yourself, the rainforest that we examined, we use satellite imagery. It's the big mountain you see to the left of this image. This was the supply chain we sorted out. It took us a while to figure out how nickel flows from the Philippines to a processing facility elsewhere in the Philippines to Japan to coming into the United States and also elsewhere in the world. We did a lot of tracking of supply chains, and I'll be happy to talk more about that with you all later. I know Gustavo and everyone at the Pulitzer Center sometimes has me stop by to talk about following supply chains. It can be a little bit tricky, but again, the tools you get and the expert help you get through the Pulitzer Center can help you untangle these things that, in a busy newsroom, you may not normally get. So whether it's using online data sets that are free, other ones that are commercial data sets, going through corporate records, being smart about going through corporate records, and sorting things out. We used all sorts of tools, among the tools that Gustavo was mentioning earlier, Sayari and OCCRP's Aleph were among those that we found very helpful for this story. And it did take time. It did take months. It was a lot of connecting the dots, but and also going through shipping records. Gustavo mentioned Import Genius. So we just had tremendous support, working with Carol. I think I spoke with her felt like almost every day, but we spoke regularly despite time zone differences to work on this story. And it led to a wonderful story where we really gave it a full, you know, visual storytelling treatment for your phone. So it's a very immersive, scrolly telly kind of experience going through this story. We had a television version of the story that appeared on nightly news. Carol, of course, had her story that appeared in the Philippines. So we were able to reach millions of people and also have a story that continues to get an audience because of the multiple ways that we put the story out there. Similarly, when we were doing our story on fast fashion, we were examining a particular kind of material called viscous rayon, which is the third most popular fabric on our clothing in the world. If you've ever had any kind of stretchy athletic clothing, it's probably viscous rayon. But to get viscous rayon, you essentially, by the way, none of this stuff is stuff I knew, by the way. This is one of the great things about the Pulitzer Center. It's not like you necessarily need to fully understand things. You just start learning stuff by being in this environment. In this case, what I learned was that to make viscous rayon, and if you've ever been to a festival where they say, our clothing comes from plant-based fabrics, it's probably viscous rayon. And what viscous rayon is you take scrubby trees like acacia and eucalyptus. They grow very fast. You grow them quickly, you chop them down, you put them into little bits, you put them into a toxic chemical bath, you wash it around, and you get this milky white substance. Who knew? And then after that, it turns into a fabric that's a lot like cotton. And it's used by all the major fashion companies out there. I had to figure out how the viscous rayon industry worked. We examined the world's largest maker of viscous rayon, which had promised to end any links to deforestation what we showed was that its promises were hollow. It was deeply involved in deforestation. And this is the biggest, again, the biggest maker of viscous rayon. We pierced the company's organizational structure to tell the story. Went through a lot of records in Indonesia and elsewhere. This, for instance, Gustavo was mentioning satellite imagery and the work you can do through the Pulitzer Center with satellite imagery. I've done a lot of work with satellite imagery. What I'm showing you right now looks simple, but it was tricky to do. All the white spots you see, the red area is a plantation. It's an area of that a particular company owns in Borneo or Kalimantan. It's a concession, and it was supposed to stop any deforestation circa 2015. All the white dots show you where deforestation has continued since 2015. So we could actually document the deforestation at this concession and 7 other large concessions on the island of Kalimantan that were all linked to the viscous rayon industry. We spoke with people in the indigenous community. We were able to put together a television piece as well as a written piece. Here you can actually see, if you look at the image on the left, this is the rainforest before the company's promises to protect the rainforest. And then if you look at the image on the right, this is after 2015 when the company had promised they would never be involved in deforestation. And here they are, they've denuded most of the hills and they're growing the kind of plants that I was talking about. We used, again, all kinds of records to do this story. Satellite imagery was hard, government records were hard. We traced the supply chain going to companies like Adidas, H&M, Esprit. We used all kinds of corporate records to do this. We also found it for Abercrombie and Fitch. This was part of the television story that we did. So again, different ways to tell the story. And again, because it's the Pulitzer Center fosters collaboration. I had done most of this reporting on my own, but a terrific reporter in Spain named Gloria Parales was really interested in what I was doing. And I called her up and said, listen, we have so much material. We have found this deforestation and the supply chains are so widespread. There's a company called Desigual based in Spain. I don't have any space to even incorporate it in my reporting. She's like, I'll take it. And Gloria, who's also a Pulitzer Center fellow, she published a Desigual focused story for El País in Spain, and that led to proposed changes in EU regulations because of this investigation. She also had a far better headline than we did, how the destruction of the rainforest is part of your underwear. So I preferred her headline to ours. We also did work examining how monkeys were being poached for vaccine and drug testing coming out of Cambodia. This started with Anton Delgado, again, another Pulitzer Center fellow based in Cambodia. We were talking, he had just done a feature story where he had talked with park rangers who had up in Angkor Wat in Cambodia, the big, beautiful ancient temple site. And they said, oh, these, he was just doing a feature story about pesky monkeys bothering tourists. And I was talking to Anton. I was like, Anton said, by the way, we heard that they might be poached, but we can't figure out where they're going to. So I worked with Anton and we sorted out that there is a legal trade for monkeys, but actually, because there's such a high demand, there's a huge illegal trade. And that's what we focused on. Again, the data work is huge. And that's one of the things the Pulitzer Center really helps you with. And we then realized there's other ways to track the macaque trade, and it's going to be different. But again, you can learn about the tools and data to do that. So we put together that story, again, television, print, in Cambodia, in the United States, going international with our collaboration. It was just a pleasure to work with. And we've done other stories as well. As an offshoot of my Pulitzer Center work, I've done stories about deforestation in Russia, going into products made by IKEA and other companies. We've again examined gold being mined illegally in Brazil, coming into the United States, the sand industry, among others. So it's a short way of saying, the short version of this is the Pulitzer Center is great. I encourage you all to apply. It really does foster a collaborative spirit that can allow you to do a bigger story than you might be able to do otherwise. They have wonderful people, Gustavo, Kang, Yelter, so many others who will help you. Fernandez here as well. Everyone is there to help you do your best version of your story and go big. So I probably have gone on too long, so I will stop and yeah.
You always amaze us. Thanks, Andy. This is so great. Yeah, we're so proud of all the work that was published by you and the collaborations. That's why we want you here. As you can see, the potential is huge, my friends. I, at this point, know what is the other question that you have in your mind, and I'm going to answer right now, is like, how many stories do I need to do while I'm being a fellow? Because, like when you have like these collaborations like Andy did, and he actually keep doing the collaborations even beyond the period that he was officially a fellow. But once a fellow, you're always a fellow. That's what we say. And he kept working with other fellows, new fellows to collaborate. But the question I'm pretty sure you have now is like how many stories you have to do throughout a year. It's up to you and your editor. It will be fine for us to have like one big series, one big story done really well done. But there's cases where people decided to publish all over the year because they think that's the strategy, even to allow their sources to know that they're on track of something and getting leaks and things. We had right now a wonderful fellow called Bruna that in Brazil, she's investigating the financial market for agribusiness, and she's releasing stories every 2 months, and she's getting a lot of tips because of this strategy. So there's different strategies. We can discuss this, but you have the freedom to decide how the format and the frequency of your publications. Start raising your hand if you have questions, and I can answer. One question that I saw here, and I answered briefly to Stasiak, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, from Nomadas in Bolivia, is how much do you need to come with a ready-made collaboration during the proposal stage? As I try to answer here in the chat, it's really good for us to get proposals like, well, I have this outlet aligned, this other outlet aligned and everything, but not very often happens, like you can have an idea. And so like, I would like to work with journalists in different countries, and I hope to, while this fellowship, aligning or making a partnership with this and this and that to be confirmed will be fine for us. Like it's about the plan. It has to be a sound plan on how to execute it. After years doing this, it's easy for us to spot like a lousy plan, if it's real or not for being implemented in a year. So think carefully about how you're going to do it, what elements you have. For us, more important than guaranteeing that all the collaboration is already aligned is for us to make sure that you know what you're talking about. You have done some pre-research, pre-reporting on the topic. You know what the sources are. You know what the data sets that you need to work with. What are the challenges that you have to overcome? How this fellowship will help you to overcome these challenges. That's what we need to know in the application. More questions for us. We have time. You can put on the chat or open your mic, raise your hand.
Hi, can this research be reflected in a form of a documentary film instead of an article or writing only? Yes,
it can. Again, as long as we see this documentary be accomplished within the period of the fellowship, we can support something that's going to take like more than, like this 10, 11 months to be completed. More like kind of a journalistic TV documentary, like the ones Andrew did, like looks like a feasible one. Sometimes we get questions about if we can fund like books. We wouldn't fund a book because we know the timeline. It takes longer. Nothing against someone publishing a book as result of their investigation, but we hope to see things published within 10, 11 months.
Okay, great, thank you.
Hello, my name
Hi.
is Ejiro Mokoro. I am from Nigeria.
Mhm.
I wanted to find out because I love the fact that we're going to be using OSINT and other similar tools for
Mhm.
investigation. But here's the thing I'm wondering. I don't know if this particular idea will fit, but because I felt it would be ideal for an OSINT kind of story. It has to do with the impact of so there's been a lot of tanker explosions in Nigeria, and it's been costing the lives of many persons. I know
Mhm.
you've emphasized a lot about the Amazon, the forest protection, and mining. Although mining is part of a subtopic, I think I can explore eventually. But I was just looking at the rate at which tanker explosion is so prevalent and the thousands of lives that have been affected by it. And I wanted to use an OSINT approach to like tell the story. I don't know if that will fit in for this particular fellowship, or there's a better angle to make it fit. I don't know.
Maybe I would have to listen more about it, depending on which region it is. I mean, we try to be the most comprehensive as possible, to not be, like enclosed in some kind of a conservationist bubble. It's not about like the environment only. We see as an organization the connection between the social problems and the environment, and the climate, and the politics, and everything. It is connected in our view. So for us, it will be important for you to explain, like where this is happening, what is the connection between this and, I don't know, emissions and climate change. If there's impacts in the forest, even more important for us, because this is part of our mandate to talk about, like the survival of this tropical forest and understand why they're being destroyed. So if you connect the dots, I think it is a good fit. Having said that, I also should say, inspired by what we just heard by Andy, is that one of the biggest successes, in our opinion, in RIN has been bringing new topics to agenda. Like I can proudly say, because of the work of Andy and Carol, that we were the first as RIN, as this group, to talk about nickel mining and the relationship about rainforest. There's many other good reports now about it, but these guys really look at the issue that nobody was looking before. Same for viscose rayon that Andy was talking about. Same for the monkey trade. Same for the collagen. Like now you see a lot of stories about how cattle raising is linked to the collagen market. That was something that came out of a project. I didn't know about it. So maybe nobody knows about explosion of tanks and how this is bad for the environment, for the lives of people. So we are open to really new angles. So I would say, in principle, might be a good fit. I sense that you need to explain really connecting the dots between the environment, the social issue, and the climate issue. John, good to see you.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay? Thanks, Gustavo, and thanks, Andy. They're really helpful presentations. Maybe just two quick, like kind of interrelated questions about eligibility. Just in terms of, I know I read on the FAQs, I think, talking about wanting, experienced investigative reporters, and I feel like I've done a few projects that might qualify for that, but obviously the fellowship provides these resources and access to collaboration, I think could take them so much farther, or could have taken them so much farther. So one is like how much does that factor in, I guess? And then two, like you mentioned the forests of Southeast Asia, how broadly do you define that? Like, does that include, for example, like Papua New Guinea and Melanesia, or perhaps some places like that? So thanks.
Thanks, John. So the issue of experience is really, I think, flexible. We were looking at people who had some experience of doing investigations, working with data, looking at, kind of doing some in-depth work. And although we put that, I see, when we see the potential of someone who has done some investigation and have a good proposal, that we are open, like to see the potential of how the training and the tools can support. So in line with what you just said, and like you've done some work investigative, but you feel that you can go much further, it's a perfect fit, I would say. for what we are looking at. You've done some work, you want to grow, we would like to have proposals from that profile. What we try to, being very transparent, what we try to communicate with that line is that if you're doing like just, like a lot of breaking news and you have a routine in your work that is really like covering one different subject every day, is tough for us to, like sometimes grasp your experience and your potential for doing a long investigation. That's more or less how we try to frame. But we're very open-minded, like sometimes it's about the proposal and how the person approaches that subject, and the support of the editor and the outlets is really key. If we see that that outlet is saying like, we will also invest in that person and allow her or him to spend a year doing their investigation, that's something that appeals for us. That's very important as well. So I see some familiar faces. I suppose many of you here has different experience, but don't stop applying. Bring your best work, and we'll consider with our open minds. Andrew, and then Melanie.
Thank you both for that presentation. Firstly, my question is also kind of like about who can apply. I remember seeing on the posting for this or on the website that you can apply if you're in an area that's not one of the 3 primary like rainforest basins, whether that be Amazon, Congo, but it's not like ideal. Do you have any examples of that, or is it primarily targeted towards people in bordering regions who are, doing cross-country, cross-border collaborations, like the sort of stuff the Pulitzer has been putting out? Or like, what are some examples where it was like, okay, they're not based somewhere that's one of these regions, but this is a good presentation or a good proposal?
That's a great question. Thank you. And we'll keep trying improving every year to be less dubious about this. And I think this year we made a little trick there that talks about like people who are covering these regions are priority because of the experience and what they can bring. But we have examples of people who are like Andy in the US and would like to cover or wanted to cover, and that we saw great potential and approved. This year we have one journalist in Nigeria and another journalist in Kenya would make the case for this kind of a boundary kind of the rainforest regions, but they are looking at the connections of these countries with the carbon markets and the timber smuggling of the countries. Last year we just had one journalist that is called Muzinguzi Blanche. He won I'm talking because I'm so proud of this. He won the best investigative journalist of Africa of the year in an award with the story that he did about timber being smuggled outside of the DRC to Uganda. So that was a clear connection, because Uganda, with the exception of very border, is not considered part of the Congo Basin. But it's such a big market, like Kampala linked to the DRC. That made the story. So the connection between the US and Cambodia, it was because monkeys were smuggled from the rainforest to the US. The connection between an European country and Brazil is because all the soybeans, or most of the soybean that comes out of Brazil, goes to Europe. So we are basically accepting applications for all over the world, as long as they explain the connections of those countries with those regions. That's what it is in practice. Yeah, hope this helps. Melanie?
Thanks, Gustavo. My question was very much along this line. I'm based in London, but I've been covering the Congo Basin for a decade. So I was wondering how you see international journalists in that case, sitting in the configuration of the fellowship. If it's very much, I don't know how it worked for you, Andrew, like if it was very much being in New York and then working with this journeys all over, or where if there is maybe travel to these places. I think the budget is quite small for travel for the expenses. So yeah, that was what I was wondering, if there were, or if it was a flexible and a matter of like what the story is. And yeah, Blanche's story was amazing. That was really incredible.
Thank you, and congratulations for your stories. I do know them. So there's no distinction between the fellows. All are treated with the same care and love. So you have the same opportunities. It's true that by being based in Europe and the US, maybe the budget wouldn't make like for a huge amount of trips, but you can use this for traveling from Europe or the US or other countries to the countries that are you covering. What we try to do, and I haven't mentioned this because in previous years we generate some expectations, but always depends on the budget. But we're aiming at 10 to 11 fellows this year. And what we do is like looking at least 3 or 2 regional, like 2 that are people that are based in Brazil, Colombia, Peru, the countries of the Amazon Basin, 2 that are based in the countries of Congo Basin, 2 that are based on, I forgot to answer your question about Southeast Asia, John, I'll answer it, in the countries of Southeast Asia, and 2 that are international settings for making it, like 8 to 10, and then we expand to 3 or in each one of the regions. So we could have like 3, 3, and 3, making up to 12, depending on the budget, but it's more likely that we'll do 10 to 11 this year because of the budget. So I think that the opportunity is quite the same, and some of these collaborations would allow you to make more out of the reporting expenses, maybe using it for a local reporting partner and doing one trip. Maybe there's like some match funding from your outlet to help to increase the project. So we expect to get global journalists in this cohort, no doubt. And just answering one thing that John asked me, what extent of Southeast Asia forests, what we're trying to focus is really, like the equatorial band. So that includes the Philippines, certainly Papua, the Mekong region. It doesn't get most of the part of the forest of India, unfortunately, but it does get this part of the Mekong region, Indonesia, Philippines, Papua. In Southeast Asia. Siripani.
Hi, I'm from Thailand. I'm based in Southeast Asia, obviously. So thank you for the presentation, and thank you guys for taking the time to answer all these questions. I just have a quick short questions. I'm just wondering that based on the election results today, do you anticipate any sort of changes in the coming year for the Pulitzer Center newsroom or resources? Thank you.
Thanks for that. That's a fun one to think about it. We were starting to discuss just before this meeting. That's I'll do my personal view actually more than anything, because we haven't had the time to discuss on Pulitzer Center. I do think that will happen because what triggered a lot of the funding for the Rainforest program was the changes that happened in Brazil and Colombia. That's my interpretation and something that I heard from our donors in 18 and 17, when they saw there was a lot of changes in the governments that were against climate policies, and they couldn't work with the support of the Norwegian aid. They made a decision of supporting civil society. So as you know, the program that we are running here is mostly supported by the Norwegian international aid. Having said that, big parenthesis, they don't interfere in anything. I guarantee you. You can publish any story, including investigations about any Norwegian business in the world. You won't get a letter from me, anything. We don't get it. You won't get it. But I saw this movement, like that they were more likely to work with civil society than working with the governments that were basically against climate and environmental policy. Thinking about that moment, I can see how more attention will be given by some of the funders to climate issues. That's my interpretation. So I don't want to sound like opportunistic or saying like there's like opportunity in the middle of, again, my personal view, I see as some kind of a tough moment. But it is likely that I think journalism, environmental journalism, will be in the spotlight. So I see as that we will need to make more work that connects the dots, as I was answering to our colleague in Nigeria, between forests and climate, oceans and climate, and all these things. So having said that, I would think that it's a good moment to bring these perspectives in some of these projects, especially because I wonder, and that's speculative, what's going to happen also in other parts of the world. I can see changes in the Brazilian politics, in Colombia for sure, over the next 2 years. And that changes a lot of things in the climate front, and the combating of deforestation, the management of land, agricultural, financial support, and also the policy of finding and combating, sanctioning some of the sectors that are causing deforestation. That's what I want to say.
Thank you.
We are at time, but I still have time if you have more questions. Otherwise, as you know, I left my email. You are free to reach out and discuss more of your questions. It's part of our job to make sure that you do the best proposal possible. Yeah, I'm super glad that we have this big attendance. Any other questions, guys? All right, so I will stop here. I want to thank you.
Gustavo, I have a question.
Of course.
I was just kind of wondering, so you talked about strategies throughout the year, like you can publish more frequently and then have more of an impact that way, or you can focus on like bigger projects. So I kind of wonder how much time it would take for like a bigger project to come together. For example, the illegal airstrip story in the Amazon forest, it looks very ambitious, and I would imagine it's hard to pull off even within a year, but I wanted to, like, if you have a little bit more to share about like what that kind of project can feasibly work out under the support of this fellowship. Thank you.
Yes, a very good question. Yeah, most of these very ambitious investigative projects that end up published as a series of like 3 or 4 stories, they took an entire year, like the entire 10, 12 months. The airstrips one, it took that story about Ghana Gold that I showed in Brazil, it took 8 months to be done. But then the part that was then shared with the New York Times, it took a little bit longer, not so much because of the investigation. The investigation was done within the 12 months, but because of the negotiation with the New York Times for collaborating with another outlet and using the same data set and giving the credits for everyone. That was the tough part. But it was published like 4 months after the conclusion of the fellowship by Manuela. But that was a unique thing. But I would say like these big ones, it would take you like 8 to 10 months to conclude it if you want to do something very ambitious, and that's fine with us. That's fine. And some of this more kind of the one I mentioned about the financial markets in Brazil, it's something that comes with a lot of, like, in the beginning, explanatory reporting, because it's such a complex issue that explains how the system works. It was well done in that sense that the first stories is just laying down the kind of the context for coming then with the investigation that was done on field and connecting to that context, like how the investment funds work connected to agribusiness. So that was an interesting strategy, like preparing the audience for such a complex issue. That was something that was done in that specific project.
Thank you, very helpful.
And I'm seeing the question of Leocassia here about same project being published in English and French. Yes, of course, that's a great way of reaching more audiences. The project that I was mentioning, done by our colleague Madeleine Jungat, who was a fellow and now is an editor for for Africa at the Pulitzer Center. She did part of her publications in French with Le Monde and part in English with Info Congo in Cameroon. So you can mix up language, and we try to incentivize this for reaching, if someone is doing a story in Colombia, why not having a Colombia version, a Spanish version, and then in English. I think Andy's projects all have two languages, like Khmer and English, Spanish and English, Portuguese and English. Andrew.
Yeah, I had one more question about, you said fellow for life is what you guys say. How long do the memberships to the databases last? Do they only last for the length of your fellowship, or do they last longer? I'm asking because one of your previous fellows was kind of like mentored me in some things and gave me access, but I believe I forgot exactly. Like, do you keep the memberships or no?
For most of the tools, we allow people to keep using it. There's like a limitation of number of users, if I'm not wrong, in Sayari, and because we now have other networks as well. We have the Ocean Reporting Network and we have the AI Accountability, and they all use Sayari as well. So we try to limit the number of users at the same time. But if you are doing an investigation and you need our help, we either give you access, or we do the research with the research team and help fellows. And what I mentioned also about being a fellow for life is that the engagement team of the Pulitzer Center never forgets you, in the sense of they will keep inviting to go to universities, and they will think, oh, that project about the airstrips, let's get this project to a new school or something like this. There's like a long life for the projects, and sometimes we published again some of the follow-up stories in our website. It's not purely propaganda. The Pulitzer Center is a very good community to be part of, and it is an organization that is very close to its beneficiaries. Like as we grow, I don't see this being lost. People get really close and get the benefits of participating on education and outreach activities, and eventually getting another grant or getting another fellowship. That's also possible. Like the more you work with the Pulitzer Center, I think the more you get to be part of new opportunities. All right, guys, it was such a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks for your attention and your questions. Again, feel free to reach out, and hoping to see your proposals soon. All right. Have a good end of your day, of your evening, and we talk soon. We'll stop the recording here.